I am Zuri, 35 years old, and today my family finally crossed a line they can never uncross. Grandma Estelle looked past my shoulder and asked, "Why are you arriving in an Uber? What happened to the custom Porsche SUV we bought you for your birthday?" Before I could even open my mouth to explain the nightmare of my morning, my mother smiled her fake society smile and said her sister needed it more. Zuri just arranges throw pillows anyway. Everyone froze. Then Grandma did something that made the blood drain completely from my parents' faces. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who underestimated your worth and tried to treat you like a stepping stone. The humid evening air of Atlanta clung to my skin as I stepped out of a standard rideshare vehicle right in front of the most exclusive steakhouse in Buckhead. Valets in crisp white shirts were rushing back and forth, parking gleaming Bentleys, massive Range Rovers, and customized sports cars. It was a typical Friday night for the African-American elite of this city, a world where what you drove, what you wore, and who you knew dictated your entire value as a human being. I smoothed down the fabric of my tailored emerald green silk dress, adjusting my posture and taking a deep breath before walking toward the heavy brass doors of the restaurant. Tonight was supposed to be a milestone celebration for my parents Marcus and Vivian. It was their 40th wedding anniversary, an event my mother had been orchestrating for the past 6 months to ensure every single member of her prestigious social circles, from her sorority sisters to the country club board members, witnessed her perfectly curated life. I have always been the outlier in this carefully maintained family portrait. While my parents groomed my younger sister Chloe to be the ultimate golden child, marrying a self-proclaimed tech entrepreneur named Brad, and securing her spot in high society, they viewed my path with thinly veiled disgust. I did not go to medical school. I did not marry a wealthy lawyer. Instead, I built a luxury real estate staging company. To the outside world, my firm handles the interior design of multi-million-dollar mansions for professional athletes and corporate titans across Georgia. I command 7-figure contracts and employ a massive team of talented designers. But to my mother, I am just a glorified maid who fluffs pillows in empty houses. I have never corrected her. Keeping my wealth a secret was the only way I found peace in a family that viewed money as a weapon. As I approached the entrance, I spotted my grandmother Estelle waiting near the valet stand. At 78 years old, Grandma Estelle is the true matriarch of our family. She is a woman who built her massive fortune from the ground up during a time when Black women were not even allowed in the rooms she eventually ended up owning. She stood tall and elegant, wrapped in a pristine cream-colored knit suit, a string of flawless South Sea pearls resting against her collarbone. She is sharp, highly observant, and possesses a zero-tolerance policy for foolishness. Her face lit up with a warm smile when she saw me, but as I walked closer, her sharp eyes darted past my shoulder, scanning the empty driveway behind me. Her smile slowly faded into a look of deep confusion. "Zuri, my beautiful girl," she said, pulling me into a warm embrace that smelled of expensive jasmine perfume. "But why are you arriving in an Uber? What happened to the custom Porsche SUV? I bought you for your 35th birthday last month." I opened my mouth, the sting of humiliation already rising in my throat. I had spent the entire morning frantically searching for my car, assuming it had been towed from my secure parking garage, only to discover the horrible truth just an hour before this dinner. But before I could form the words to explain the absolute betrayal I had just uncovered, the heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung open. My mother Vivian marched out, flanked by my father Marcus and my sister Chloe. My mother looked like she had just stepped off the cover of a society magazine, dripping in diamonds and wearing a salmon pink gown that perfectly matched her sorority colors. Chloe stood beside her, gently resting a hand on her slightly swollen belly, playing the role of the delicate, expectant mother to perfection. My mother did not even greet me. She stepped right in front of me, flashing a bright, aggressively artificial smile at Grandma Estelle. "Oh, do not worry about the car, Mother Estelle," she said, her voice dripping with that syrupy southern charm she reserved for moments when she was trying to manipulate a situation. Chloe needed it more. We went ahead and transferred the vehicle to her name this morning. I stood completely paralyzed. The sheer audacity of her statement hung heavily in the warm air. Grandma Estelle blinked, her posture stiffening. "You did what?" My mother let out a light dismissive laugh, waving her manicured hand in the air as if she were swatting away a pesky fly. "Well, you know how it is. Chloe is pregnant now. She is on the alumni board of the sorority, and she is organizing the upcoming charity gala for the Children's Hospital. She simply cannot be seen driving around Buckhead in that old vehicle she had. It is about maintaining the family image. Brad is meeting with investors all week, so Chloe needs a safe, reliable, and prestigious vehicle to handle her duties." My mother then turned her gaze to me, looking me up and down with an expression of profound pity that made my blood boil. "Zuri does not need a luxury SUV to go run errands. She just drives around town arranging throw pillows and moving fake plants into empty houses. A regular car or an Uber is perfectly fine for her line of work. Honestly, the Porsche was entirely too flashy for a single woman with no real career prospects. It sends the wrong message. We were actually doing her a favor by taking that financial burden off her hands." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the valets seemed to stop moving, sensing the explosive tension radiating from our circle. My father Marcus stood slightly behind his wife, looking down at his expensive Italian loafers, refusing to make eye contact with me. He had always been a man obsessed with control, and appearances entirely complicit in my mother's toxic favoritism. Chloe just stood there, batting her eyelashes and offering me a weak, unapologetic smile, looking exactly like the spoiled child who had just snatched a toy from someone else's hands because she knew her parents would defend her. I stood there staring at my younger sister, recalling every single time my parents had forced me to sacrifice my own happiness for hers. I remembered the summer they emptied my college savings account to pay for Chloe's lavish destination wedding, claiming I could easily take out student loans because I was the smart one while Chloe needed a perfect start to her marriage. I remembered the holidays where my gifts were regifted to her, the moments where my achievements were silenced so she could shine. And now, they had literally stolen a vehicle right out of my private garage by forging my signature. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give my mother the satisfaction of seeing me break down in public, which is exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to look unstable, angry, and ungrateful in front of the valet stand so she could justify her actions to anyone watching. I just looked at her, letting the absolute silence stretch until her fake smile began to tremble slightly at the corners. I turned my gaze to Grandma Estelle, waiting for her reaction. I expected her to raise her voice. I expected her to scold my parents right there on the sidewalk for their blatant theft and blatant disrespect. But Grandma Estelle was a woman who understood that true power is never loud. True power does not need to shout to be felt. Her face was completely devoid of emotion. It was a mask of pure, terrifying calm. She did not look at my mother. She did not look at my father. She simply reached into her quilted leather handbag and pulled out her smartphone. The screen illuminated her face in the darkening evening light. She dialed a number, brought the phone to her ear, and waited for exactly 3 seconds. "Richard," she said, her voice smooth and chillingly steady, "I need you to execute an immediate freeze on Trust Fund number 4. Yes, completely. Deny all pending transactions, revoke all authorized user privileges, and halt the monthly disbursements effective this exact minute. I will be in your office at 9 tomorrow morning to initiate a full forensic audit of the account. Thank you." She lowered the phone and slipped it back into her handbag with a soft click that sounded louder than a gunshot in the quiet evening air. The color instantly drained from my parents' faces. My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a sudden, poorly concealed panic. Trust Fund number 4 was the primary account my parents relied on to fund their extravagant lifestyle. It paid for their luxury vehicles, their country club memberships, and the sprawling mortgage on their Buckhead mansion. My mother's mouth opened and closed silently like a fish pulled out of water. The smug satisfaction that had been resting on her features just moments ago completely vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. Grandma Estelle finally looked directly at my mother, her gaze cutting straight through the layers of makeup and societal pretense. Shall we go inside for dinner now? She asked politely. I suddenly have quite an appetite. The walk through the grand dining room of the steakhouse was a masterclass in high society deception. My mother, Vivian, immediately pasted on a stiff smile, nodding to acquaintances at nearby tables, as if her financial lifeline had not just been severed on the sidewalk outside. My father, Marcus, marched ahead with a rigid posture, his jaw clenched so tightly I could practically hear his teeth grinding over the smooth jazz playing from the overhead speakers. Grandma Estelle glided beside me, her arm linked gracefully through mine, completely unbothered by the sheer panic radiating from my parents. The hostess led us to a private mahogany-paneled room at the back of the restaurant. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn to separate us from the main dining area, providing an illusion of intimacy for a family that was currently fracturing at the seams. We took our seats around the massive circular table. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the pristine white tablecloth, but the atmosphere was absolute ice. Waiters immediately swarmed the room, pouring sparkling water and handing out leather-bound menus, completely oblivious to the silent war taking place. My parents were visibly spiraling. My father kept checking his phone under the table, likely trying to reach his financial advisors, while my mother took a massive gulp of her ice water, her hands trembling slightly. They were terrified of Grandma Estelle, but their pride would never let them admit defeat. That was the moment Brad decided to make his presence known. My white brother-in-law lacked the generational wealth and social grace of the circles my family moved in, but he possessed an endless supply of unearned confidence. He leaned back in his leather chair, stretching his legs out and adjusting the cuffs of a tailored suit my father had undoubtedly paid for. He looked at me with a smirk that made my stomach turn. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a heavy set of keys attached to a distinctive leather fob, and tossed them casually across the table. The keys slid across the smooth white linen and clattered aggressively against the base of my crystal water glass. "Thanks for the ride, sister-in-law," Brad said, his voice loud and dripping with obnoxious entitlement. "I really appreciate you letting us break in that new custom Porsche. The suspension is incredible, by the way. I have to warn you, though, the cream-colored leather interior is a little easy to ruin. I accidentally spilled my iced coffee on the passenger seat this morning on my way to a pitch meeting. But I am sure you do not mind, right? You can just have one of your cleaning people scrub it out. Oh, and since the registration and insurance policy are still tied to your primary address, make sure you do not miss the premium payment this month. Chloe and I have a lot of expenses coming up with the baby, so we would hate for the coverage to lapse while she is driving it." The sheer audacity of his words hung in the air. He was entirely serious. He truly believed he was entitled to a luxury vehicle I had earned with my own blood, sweat, and tears, simply because he married my sister. He thought he could ruin my property and demand I continue paying for his privilege to use it. Chloe sat next to him, looking down at her menu, as if the prices were the most fascinating thing in the world. My parents remained silent, implicitly supporting Brad's blatant disrespect by refusing to correct him. They expected me to lower my head. They expected me to swallow the humiliation for the sake of keeping the peace, just like I had done my entire life. But I did not cry. I did not look away. I reached out, picked up the keys, and dropped them straight into my emerald clutch before snapping it shut. I stared directly into Brad's arrogant eyes, matching his tone with a deadly calm precision. "You spilling coffee on my custom leather and expecting me to clean up your mess is exactly how you operate, Brad. In fact, it is incredibly consistent with your entire relationship with this family." Brad's smirk faltered slightly. He shifted in his chair, trying to maintain his relaxed posture. "I am just saying it was an accident, Zuri. Do not make a big deal out of a little coffee." "I am not making a big deal out of coffee," I replied, leaning forward, resting my arms on the table. "I am just noticing a pattern. It is exactly like the time Mom forced me to sign over my entire college savings fund so Chloe could afford that massive destination wedding at the Ritz-Carlton with you. Do you remember that, Brad?" "I remember it perfectly." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Zuri, keep your voice down. We do not discuss private financial matters in public spaces." I ignored her entirely, keeping my focus locked on Brad, who was now looking decidedly less confident. You needed a lavish wedding to impress your fake startup investors? I continued my words, slicing through the heavy silence of the room. Mom and Dad told me that family requires sacrifice. They told me I was smart enough to figure out student loans, while Chloe needed the right aesthetic start to her marriage to a brilliant entrepreneur. So I gave up $75,000 of my own future. I worked 3 jobs and took night classes while you two sipped champagne on a beach in Maldives on my dime. And now you expect me to subsidize your daily commute. Chloe finally looked up, her lower lip trembling as she immediately deployed her favorite weapon. Zuri, why are you doing this to me? Why are you attacking my husband on Mom and Dad's anniversary? I am pregnant. I cannot handle this kind of hostile energy. You have always been so jealous of me and Brad. We just needed a safe car for your future niece or nephew, and you are turning it into an interrogation. She reached for a linen napkin, dabbing at dry eyes. My mother immediately reached across the table to pat Chloe's hand, glaring at me with raw hatred. See what you have done. You are upsetting your sister. You have absolutely no class, Zuri. Bringing up ancient history just to ruin our evening. We paid you back for that college money by allowing you to live in our basement for a year after graduation. You owe us. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Living in a damp, unfinished basement while paying you rent does not equate to $75,000, Mom. And the only thing I am jealous of is the absolute delusion you all live in. The sound of a heavy fist slamming against the solid mahogany table echoed through the private room, rattling the silverware and silencing my mother's defense. My father Marcus was no longer looking at his shoes. His face was a dark, stormy mask of fury. The veins in his neck were visibly pulsing against his stiff white collar. He hated losing control, and right now the control he had wielded over me for 35 years was slipping rapidly through his fingers. That is enough, he commanded, his baritone voice echoing off the paneled walls. I will not sit here and listen to you disrespect your mother, your sister, and your brother-in-law. This family has maintained a pristine reputation in Atlanta for decades, and I will not let your bitter, selfish attitude destroy it. He reached down beside his chair and pulled up a sleek leather briefcase. The metallic snap of the latch's opening sounded like a gavel dropping in a courtroom. He reached inside and pulled out a crisp white legal document, smoothing it out flat on the table right next to my dinner plate. He then retrieved a gold-plated fountain pen and placed it deliberately on top of the paper. I looked down. It was a vehicle title transfer document, completely filled out with my vehicle's identification number, my personal details, and Chloe's name listed as the new registered owner. The entire table held its collective breath. Brad leaned back again, a victorious smirk slowly returning to his face. He clearly believed that the threat of being disinherited was the ultimate trump card. In their world, money was the only language that mattered. They used inheritance as a leash to keep everyone obedient and compliant. Chloe watched me with wide, expectant eyes, waiting for me to pick up the gold pen and surrender, just like I had surrendered my bedroom when she wanted a larger closet, just like I had surrendered my college fund for her wedding. My mother crossed her arms over her chest, looking incredibly satisfied. Marcus is right, Zuri, she added, her voice laced with poison. You have to decide what is more important to you right now. A flashy car that you do not even deserve, or your place in this family. If you walk away from us, you will have nothing. You will be a lonely staging coordinator moving furniture for people who actually have real wealth. Think very carefully before you throw away your future over sheer stubbornness. I looked at the gold pen resting on the white paper. I thought about the millions of dollars currently sitting in my own diversified business accounts. I thought about the commercial properties I owned outright, the massive staging warehouses, the payroll I managed every 2 weeks for 40 employees. They genuinely believed I needed their money. They genuinely believed that the threat of losing a fraction of a mismanaged family trust would force me to my knees. Grandma Estelle sat quietly to my right, slowly sipping her sparkling water. She did not say a word. She did not intervene. She was simply watching the spectacle unfold, her sharp eyes tracking my every movement, waiting to see if I had the backbone to stand up to the tyrants she had unfortunately raised. The air conditioning kicked on, blowing a cool breeze across the back of my neck, but the heat of my anger kept me burning from the inside out. I slowly reached my hand out toward the document. I saw Brad nudge Chloe under the table, a silent celebration of their victory. I saw my father's shoulders relax slightly, assuming he had successfully bullied me into submission once again. But I did not pick up the pen. I placed my index finger on the edge of the transfer paper and slowly slid it back across the smooth white tablecloth, pushing it directly until it hit my father's water glass. My father, Marcus, slammed his hand violently onto the table, making the heavy silverware jump. He pulled the property transfer document back toward me, pointing a trembling finger at the signature line. "You will sign this car over to Chloe to legitimize this transfer and save our family face right now," he demanded, his voice echoing off the walls. "You will do it, or I swear to you, Zuri, I will write you out of my will tonight and you will be left with absolutely nothing." I picked up the thick, expensive property transfer paper that my father had just slammed down onto the table. I held it between my fingers, feeling the heavy grain of the cardstock. Everyone in the room stopped breathing. My father, Marcus, leaned forward, expecting me to reach for the gold-plated fountain pen. He expected me to sign away the luxury vehicle I rightfully owned, just to keep the peace and protect my place in a will that had always been dangled over my head like a dog treat. Instead, I gripped the top edge of the document and ripped it straight down the middle. The sound of tearing paper was incredibly loud in the dead silence of the private dining room. I placed the two torn halves together and ripped them again, letting the four pieces fall like useless confetti onto my empty dinner plate. My father stared at the torn paper, his mouth slightly open in complete shock. The dark, angry red color creeping up his neck told me he was entirely unprepared for this level of defiance. "Do you honestly think I care about your will?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm and steady. "You are threatening to cut me out of money you do not even have, Dad. You are threatening me with an inheritance that is nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Do not think I have been completely blind to what is happening behind the scenes. I know exactly why you need me to sign this car over to Chloe officially tonight." My father took a step back, his eyes darting nervously toward Grandma Estelle before locking back onto me. "I have no idea what you are talking about," he snapped, but his voice had lost its booming authority. I stood up slowly, resting my hands on the mahogany table. "I am talking about the insurance policy on that Porsche," I said. "You did not just take the car, Dad. You forged my signature. You took out a premium commercial liability policy listing Brad as the primary beneficiary in the event of a total loss. You are deeply in debt. Your wealth management firm is under investigation by the state board, and you were planning to have Brad stage a massive accident to collect the payout under my name, just to save your own skin." The color drained entirely from Brad's face. The smug, arrogant smirk he had worn since walking into the restaurant vanished in an instant. He looked at my father, panic setting in his eyes. He practically jumped out of his leather chair. "You told me it was a standard policy," Brad stammered instantly, throwing his father-in-law under the bus to save himself. "You told me she approved it, Marcus. You said it was just a legal loophole for tax purposes." I let out a harsh, dry laugh that cut through the room. "Do not play the victim here, Brad. Your fake artificial intelligence startup just got denied a second round of funding last week because the auditors found out you fabricated your user numbers. You needed a quick payout just as badly as my father did to keep up the illusion that you actually work for a living. You were both in on it, and you thought I was just a clueless decorator who would not notice a massive insurance premium being routed to her home address." Chloe let out a dramatic, piercing gasp. She knocked her crystal water glass over, sending ice and water spilling across the pristine white tablecloth. She clutched her stomach, bending forward as if she were in terrible, agonizing pain. "Oh my God," she wailed, leaning heavily against Brad, who looked too terrified to even comfort her properly. "The stress. She is stressing out the baby. Mom, make her stop right now. My baby is hurting. This toxic environment is going to cause a miscarriage." My mother, Vivian, rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Chloe. She glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, her diamond earrings flashing in the chandelier light. Look what you are doing! Vivian screamed, all pretense of southern elegance completely shattered. You are endangering your unborn niece or nephew because you are a bitter, jealous, miserable woman. You are tearing this family apart over a piece of metal. I reached into my emerald silk clutch. I did not pull out a tissue. I did not pull out a handkerchief to wipe away tears. I pulled out an itemized medical invoice. I unfolded the paper slowly and deliberately, making sure the Beverly Hills Surgical Clinic logo was clearly visible at the top of the page. A baby, I asked, tilting my head slightly as I looked at my younger sister. That is absolutely fascinating, Chloe. Because according to this detailed invoice, the only thing currently gestating inside your body is the trauma of a massive liposuction and tummy tuck procedure. Chloe froze. The theatrical wailing stopped instantly. She stood up perfectly straight, dropping her hands from her stomach. I looked down at the paper and read the text out loud, ensuring my voice carried to every corner of the room. Premium postpartum contouring, extensive fat removal, and complete abdominal muscle repair. Total cost $38,000. Paid in full on the 14th of this month. I looked up and locked eyes with my mother, whose face had turned the color of chalk. And how exactly was this luxury surgery paid for? I asked. Oh, right. Using the secondary American Express card attached to my corporate business account. The exact same emergency card Mom swore was only to be used for extreme life or death family emergencies. My mother let go of Chloe, staring at the medical invoice in my hand as if it were a venomous snake. Chloe's face contorted with panic and rage. You went through my private mail! Chloe shrieked, her fake pregnancy pain entirely forgotten. That is illegal, Zuri. You cannot read my medical records. It is my credit card statement, you absolute fool, I fired back, refusing to back down. The billing statements come directly to my office. You spent $38,000 of my hard-earned money to suck the fat out of your stomach. You padded your expensive designer dress with a silicone belly just to secure sympathy money from Grandma Estelle tonight. And then you had the absolute nerve to steal my luxury vehicle because you needed something big and safe for a baby that does not even exist. The silence that hit the room was suffocating. Grandma Estelle sat perfectly still, watching my mother and sister unravel with a look of cold, calculating disappointment. My mother lunged forward. She closed the distance between us in 2 quick steps, and her hand cracked across my face in a sharp, stinging slap. The sound echoed off the wood-paneled walls like a firecracker. The physical impact jerked my head to the side, and a hot, burning sensation bloomed across my left cheek. You disrespectful, ungrateful wretch! My mother screamed, her chest heaving as she pointed a shaking finger at the door. How dare you speak to your sister that way? How dare you humiliate us in public? Get out of my sight. You are not welcome at this anniversary dinner. You are not welcome in our home ever again. Pack whatever trash you have left at our house and get out of our lives completely. I slowly turned my head back to face her. I reached up and touched my stinging cheek with the tips of my fingers. And then a genuine, radiant smile broke across my face. It was the smile of a woman who had finally been set free from a lifetime of emotional captivity. The slap did not break me. It broke the very last chain they held over my life. I will gladly leave, I said softly, picking up my clutch from the table. But before you walk out into that main dining room to order your expensive steaks and drink champagne to celebrate your beautiful fake family, you might want to log into your banking application, Mom. My mother paused, her hands still raised in the air. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. What did you do? I did exactly what you asked me to do earlier, I said, mimicking her syrupy sweet tone perfectly. I took the financial burden off my hands. I called American Express on the Uber ride over here tonight. I reported the $38,000 surgical charge as direct fraud and initiated a full chargeback. And while I had the fraud department on the line, I went ahead and permanently canceled every single secondary card tied to my name. My father collapsed back into his leather chair, a look of pure defeat washing over his face. Your luxury shopping card, Mom. I continued, checking them off on my fingers. Chloe's endless emergency card and Dad's international travel account. They are all completely dead, burned to the ground. I turned around my silk dress, catching the light as I faced the heavy mahogany doors. Have a wonderful anniversary dinner. I sincerely hope Grandma Estelle is paying because right now, none of you have a single working credit card to your name. The morning sun spilled across the polished concrete floors of my corporate headquarters in Midtown Atlanta, illuminating a space that represented everything my family refused to acknowledge. If there were a camera documenting my life right now, it would execute a slow, deliberate dolly-in shot, creeping closer and closer to my face as the adrenaline of last night's restaurant confrontation faded, leaving behind a cold, calculating clarity. I was sitting at the head of a massive glass conference table, suspended above a 50,000 square foot climate-controlled warehouse. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, I could look down and see my logistics team loading a fleet of branded box trucks. They were preparing to install custom imported Italian furniture and curated art pieces into an $8 million estate in Sandy Springs. This was my reality. My staging firm did not just arrange throw pillows for open houses. We executed multi-million-dollar transformations for developers, professional athletes, and international investors. My company evaluated market demographics, sourced bespoke furnishings from Europe, and increased property closing values by millions. I had built a highly lucrative empire entirely from scratch without a single dime of Sterling family money. I employed 40 full-time staff members, including interior architects, project managers, and a ruthless financial team. Sitting across from me was David, my chief financial officer. He was reviewing our quarterly revenue projections, tapping his silver pen against a leather folio. We were up 22% from the previous quarter, on track to clear 8 figures in annual gross revenue. I was half listening to his breakdown of our new vendor contracts, my mind still lingering on the look of absolute terror on my mother's face when I canceled her credit cards. I had assumed the worst was over. I had assumed that cutting off their immediate cash flow and walking away from that disastrous anniversary dinner was the final closing chapter of my family trauma. I was wrong. The nightmare had not even fully begun. My private desk phone rang, cutting through the quiet hum of the air conditioning. It was a direct line, very few people had the number. I glanced at the caller ID and frowned. It was the Corporate Fraud and Risk Management Division of First Heritage Bank, the institution that handled my primary business operating accounts. A sudden chill washed over me. I pressed the speaker button. "Zuri Sterling speaking," I said, leaning forward in my ergonomic chair. David stopped tapping his pen and looked up instantly, sensing the shift in the room's energy. "Miss Sterling, this is Robert Hayes, Senior Risk Analyst with First Heritage Corporate Banking." The voice on the other end was tight, rigid, and entirely stripped of the usual pleasantries reserved for high-net-worth clients. "I am calling regarding the commercial bridge loan originated under your primary holding company. We have issued 2 automated warnings regarding the delinquency, but as of this morning, the account is officially 90 days past due. We are moving to initiate asset seizure protocols if the default is not cured by close of business today." I froze. The ambient noise of the warehouse below seemed to completely drop away. David immediately opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he accessed our banking portals. "Mr. Hayes, there must be a catastrophic error in your system," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level despite the sudden violent pounding of my heart. "My firm holds 0 debt. We operate strictly on cash reserves and liquid capital. I have never authorized a commercial bridge loan." "There is no error, Miss Sterling," Robert replied, the sound of keystrokes echoing over the speakerphone. "I am looking at the origination file right now. A $500,000 commercial line of credit was drawn against your corporate assets exactly 96 days ago. The funds were fully dispersed within 24 hours of approval. The outstanding balance, including penalty fees and compounding interest, is currently $542,000. $500,000, $500,000. David spun his laptop around to face me. His screen showed a hidden sub-account buried deep within our corporate structure, an account neither of us had opened. The ledger showed a massive influx of cash that was immediately wired out in 3 separate untraceable tranches. "I need you to trace those outbound wire transfers right this second." I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Where did that $500,000 go? There was a tense silence on the phone. I could hear Robert breathing heavily. Miss Sterling, I cannot disclose the routing destination of dispersed funds over the phone without a court order. You will disclose it right now, or my legal team will be inside your lobby in exactly 15 minutes with a federal lawsuit for gross negligence and institutional fraud, I snapped, slamming my hand down on the glass table. I am the sole owner of this corporation. Trace the wire. I heard a heavy sigh followed by more frantic typing. The funds were routed through a blind LLC holding company. Robert finally conceded, his voice shaking slightly. But the ultimate destination account for all three transfers was a corporate entity registered as Sterling Wealth Management Group. My lungs contracted. The air was completely sucked out of the room. Sterling Wealth Management Group, my father's firm. The pieces of the puzzle collided in my mind with terrifying speed. The desperate threats at the restaurant last night, the sudden need to steal my Porsche and commit insurance fraud. My father was not just struggling with a few bad investments, he was facing total financial ruin. His firm was collapsing under the weight of his incompetence and greed. He needed a massive injection of liquid cash to cover his tracks and avoid federal prosecution, so he stole it from the one person he thought he could outsmart. He stole it from the daughter he viewed as nothing more than an obedient stepping stone. But the mechanics of the theft did not make sense. I built this company with paranoid levels of security. My corporate accounts required dual biometric authentication and physical signatures for any credit origination. My father could not just walk into a bank branch and take out a $500,000 loan in my company's name simply because we shared a last name. Someone on the inside had to have bypassed the security protocols. Someone with high-level executive clearance had to have manually overridden the system to approve a fraudulent loan of that magnitude. Mr. Hayes, I said, my voice dropping to an icy, terrifying calm. I want you to look at the approval signature on that origination file. I want you to tell me exactly who manually approved a $500,000 unverified commercial loan without ever sitting in a room with me. There was a long, dreadful pause. I could hear the paper rustling over the speakerphone. The loan was not processed through standard digital underwriting, Miss Sterling, Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was originated and personally approved through an executive manual override. It was pushed through by the Senior Vice President of Regional Operations. Give me the name, I demanded. Evelyn Carter, Robert said. The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Aunt Evelyn, my mother's college roommate, her line sister from their beloved sorority, the woman who had attended every single family barbecue, every holiday dinner, and every country club gala my parents ever hosted. She was my mother's absolute best friend in the world, and she was the Senior Vice President of Regional Operations at First Heritage Bank. My mother, Vivian, had not just stood by while my father drained my college fund years ago. She had actively conspired with her best friend to commit federal bank fraud, to save her husband's failing business and protect her lavish lifestyle. They had used my social security number, my corporate tax identification, and my impeccable credit history to secure $500,000, assuming I was too stupid or too distracted by throw pillows to ever notice the discrepancy. I looked at David, who was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. He knew exactly what this meant. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was a coordinated, multi-layered criminal conspiracy designed to leave me holding the bag for my parents' spectacular failures. They had intended to let the loan default, completely ruining my business and my reputation, while they safely hid behind the walls of their Buckhead mansion. I did not panic. I did not cry. A cold, ruthless energy settled into my bones, replacing every ounce of familial loyalty I had ever possessed. Mr. Hayes, I said, leaning back in my chair and staring out at the beautiful Atlanta skyline. Do not freeze the account. Leave it exactly as it is. I am calling my federal litigation attorney right now, and we are going to let Evelyn Carter and my father explain this $500,000 fraud to the FBI. I bypassed the mahogany reception desk at First Heritage Bank, entirely ignoring the protests of the terrified administrative assistant. The heavy glass door to the senior vice president's suite was locked, but I did not stop walking. I knocked hard twice before pushing my way inside. Evelyn Carter was sitting behind her pristine marble desk, holding a bone china teacup. She was dressed in her signature tailored Chanel suit, her pearls resting perfectly against her collarbone, the picture of buckhead banking elegance. She looked up, and her carefully practiced smile instantly froze. "Zuri, sweetheart." She began, her voice dropping an octave as she quickly set her teacup down. "What a surprise. You should have had your assistant call ahead. I would have cleared my schedule for my favorite niece." I did not sit down. I walked directly to her desk and dropped the printed ledger from my finance team onto her keyboard. "Do not call me Sweetheart Evelyn. And do not pretend you do not know exactly why I am standing in your office. I want to know how long it took you to manually override the biometric security protocols on my corporate account. Was it a 5-minute job, or did it take you all afternoon to commit federal wire fraud?" Evelyn swallowed hard. The color drained from her perfectly contoured face. She glanced nervously at the frosted glass walls of her office, making sure the blinds were drawn. "Zuri, you need to lower your voice. This is a misunderstanding. Your father came to me in absolute desperation. He just needed a temporary bridge loan to cover some liquidity issues at his firm. He swore he would pay it back before the first quarter statement was even generated. He forged my signature. I stated my voice perfectly level but sharp as a razor, and you knowingly approved it. You bypassed the underwriting department because you knew they would flag it immediately. You leveraged your position at this bank to steal $500,000 from my staging company to bail out your sorority sister's husband." "That is not a misunderstanding, Evelyn. That is a Class B felony carrying a 20-year federal prison sentence." Before Evelyn could form another pathetic excuse, the heavy glass door swung open again. My mother Vivian marched into the office. She was wearing a breathless expression and carrying a Hermes Birkin bag like a shield. Evelyn must have texted her the second the front desk warned her I was in the building. My mother did not miss a beat. She immediately stepped between me and Evelyn, throwing her shoulders back and lifting her chin to deploy her absolute best society matron glare. "Have you lost your mind, Zuri?" Vivian demanded, her voice hissing with venom. "Storming into a professional establishment and threatening your Aunt Evelyn. You are acting like a complete unhinged maniac. You should be down on your knees thanking her for stepping in to help this family when you were too selfish to do it yourself." I stared at my mother, completely unbothered by her theatrical outrage. Thanking her, I asked. "You want me to thank a bank executive for helping you and Dad steal $500,000 of my money?" "It is not stealing," Vivian spat, stepping closer to me. "It is called wealth reallocation. Your father built the sterling name in this city. He paid for the food in your mouth and the clothes on your back for 18 years. His firm hit a minor temporary roadblock. We needed liquid capital to satisfy an audit, and you have millions just sitting around in your useless little staging business. You are an ungrateful, selfish daughter who would rather see her own parents go to federal prison than share her unearned wealth." "My wealth is not unearned, Mom," I replied, maintaining dead-eye contact. "I built my empire with my own blood, sweat and tears while you were busy hosting country club luncheons. And do not talk to me about family loyalty. I know exactly who you are loyal to. You are perfectly willing to rob your black daughter blind to finance the lavish lifestyle of your fake white startup entrepreneur son-in-law." Vivian gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "How dare you bring Brad into this? Brad is a brilliant visionary. He is building an artificial intelligence company that is going to change the world. He brings class and innovation to this family. You are just jealous because he is 10 times the business owner you will ever be." A visionary, I laughed, a cold, harsh sound that made Evelyn flinch behind her desk. "Brad is a scam artist who married Chloe because he thought he was marrying into endless generational wealth. You protect him at all costs because having a white tech bro son-in-law fits your delusional country club aesthetic. You protect him so much that you completely ignore the racist garbage he posts online." My mother's eyes darted away for a fraction of a second. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Yes, you do. I fired back, stepping into her personal space. Do not play dumb with me. I sent you the screenshots myself last Thanksgiving. I showed you Brad's anonymous Reddit account where he constantly complained about DEI hires ruining the corporate world. I showed you the Twitter thread where he mocked my business, calling it an urban decoration service that only succeeded because of affirmative action quotas. He sits at your dinner table eating your food while secretly despising everything about our culture and our skin color. And you look the other way. You actively ignore his blatant racism because the proximity to his white privilege makes you feel superior. Vivian's jaw clenched, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the leather of her handbag. Brad's online comments were just taken out of context, she argued, her voice trembling with desperate denial. It is just aggressive business talk, Zuri. You are too sensitive. He loves this family. He is protecting Chloe and providing for their future. He is the only reason your father's firm even has a chance of survival right now. Brad is managing the bridge loan funds personally to ensure the auditors are satisfied. I stopped. The air in the room suddenly felt very heavy. A cold realization began to creep down my spine. I looked past my mother directly at Evelyn, who was frantically typing on her computer, trying to look busy. Evelyn, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Pull up the wire transfer ledger. Right now. Evelyn froze. Zuri, I cannot do that. The funds have already cleared. Pull up the Swift network clearance terminal. Evelyn, I commanded, slamming my palm against the marble desk. You approved the wire. You have the administrative clearance to trace the final destination hop. Show me exactly where that $500,000 landed after it left the Blind LLC holding company. Do it, or I am calling the FBI from this very office. Evelyn's hands shook violently as she clicked her mouse. She navigated through the bank's secure mainframe, accessing the global wire clearing system. My mother turned around, watching the screen with a mixture of annoyance and confusion. Your father's firm received the money, Vivian said, her voice dripping with misplaced confidence. Brad set up the holding company to route the funds securely so the auditors would not flag the sudden influx of cash from a family member. It was a brilliant financial maneuver. Evelyn hit the final key. The screen refreshed, displaying a detailed transaction receipt. Read it out loud, Evelyn, I ordered. Evelyn stared at the monitor. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and sickly. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Read it, I demanded. The final destination account. Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking. It is an offshore corporate account registered in the Cayman Islands. Vivian frowned, stepping closer to the desk. What does that mean? What offshore account? It is supposed to be the Sterling Wealth Management holding account. That is what Brad told us. I leaned over the desk, staring directly at the highlighted text on the banking monitor. The routing numbers were clear. The beneficiary name was printed in stark black letters. The money never went to Dad's firm, I said slowly, letting the absolute gravity of the situation crush the remaining air out of the room. The $500,000 you stole from me to save your husband did not go to Sterling Wealth Management. It bypassed the firm entirely. I turned to look at my mother, whose face was slowly twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The final clearing account is registered to Bradley Hayes, I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. Your brilliant visionary son-in-law just took your $500,000 fraudulent loan, funneled it through a shell company, and dumped it straight into his own personal offshore bank account. He just stole everything, Mom. And he left you and Dad holding the bag for federal wire fraud. I walked out of the executive suite at First Heritage Bank without looking back, leaving my mother choking on the toxic reality she had helped create. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind me, cutting off the sound of her frantic breathing. I marched straight through the marble lobby, ignoring the stares of the bank tellers and security guards. The humid Atlanta air hit my face the moment I stepped outside, but my mind was completely ice cold. I got into my car, gripping the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Brad had played them all. He had leveraged their financial desperation and their blind racial bias to orchestrate the perfect theft. My mother and father were so desperate to maintain their country club facade and so eager to elevate a white tech bro into their inner circle that they had handed him the keys to their destruction. They had committed federal wire fraud, forged my signature, and risked 2 decades in a federal penitentiary, all to secure $500,000 that Brad immediately stole for himself. My phone was already vibrating endlessly in my cup holder. The screen lit up with call after call from Vivian, followed by frantic text messages begging me to return to the bank. I flipped the phone over, ignoring it entirely. I put the car in drive and headed north toward Buckhead. I needed to see the only person who held more power in this family than my father. Grandma Estelle lived in a sprawling stone mansion surrounded by ancient oak trees and wrought iron security gates. The family loved to whisper that Estelle was losing her grip on reality. At family dinners, my mother would roll her eyes whenever Estelle spoke too slowly. My father treated her like a fragile antique that needed to be dusted occasionally but otherwise ignored. They dismissed her silence as early onset dementia, assuming she was too old and too disconnected to understand modern business. They were completely wrong. When I walked through the heavy mahogany front doors, her longtime housekeeper, Rosa, did not ask me why I was there. She simply gave me a knowing nod and directed me straight to the rear sunroom. Estelle was sitting perfectly upright in a high-backed velvet chair, sipping black tea from a delicate porcelain cup. The morning light poured in through the arched windows, illuminating the sharp, intelligent gleam in her dark eyes. She did not look surprised to see me. In fact, she looked like she had been sitting in that exact chair expecting my arrival all morning. "Close the double doors," Zuri, she commanded, her voice carrying a pristine, crystalline clarity that would have sent my mother into cardiac arrest. "And turn off your cellular phone. We have a massive amount of ground to cover today, and I absolutely refuse to be interrupted by Marcus weeping over the phone about his spectacular failures." I locked the doors, sliding the heavy brass bolt into place before taking a seat across from her. "You know what just happened?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "I know exactly what happened," she replied, setting her teacup down with a sharp, definitive clink against the saucer. "I have known for 5 years that your father was bleeding Sterling Wealth Management completely dry. He took out secret high-interest loans, he gambled client funds on highly speculative commercial real estate, and he actively used corporate operating accounts to finance Vivian's absurd socialite lifestyle. He is a pathetic businessman who relied entirely on the stellar reputation your grandfather built from nothing." I stared at her, completely stunned by the venom and precision in her words. "If you knew he was destroying the family legacy, why did you just sit back and watch it happen?" I asked, leaning forward. "Why did you let him forge my signature to steal $500,000 through Evelyn?" Estelle leaned forward, mirroring my posture, her dark eyes piercing straight through my confusion. "Because I needed to know which one of my grandchildren actually had a spine," she stated plainly. "I needed to see who would bend the knee to Marcus and who had the raw strength to fight back. Chloe is a superficial parasite who married a grifter because she lacks the basic intelligence to generate her own wealth. I knew Brad was a complete fraud the very moment he walked into my house, wearing expensive loafers without socks, talking about phantom venture capital. But you, Zuri, you built an empire entirely on your own terms. You took the absolute bare minimum this family threw at you and turned it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I needed to know if you had the ruthless instinct required to protect what is rightfully yours." I told her everything about the bank. I told her about Evelyn bypassing the underwriting security protocols and Brad routing the stolen money to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I watched her face closely, expecting shock or outrage, but Estelle did not even flinch. She simply nodded, a cold, calculating smile slowly forming on her lips. "They honestly think they have outsmarted the financial system," she said, interlacing her fingers, resting them on her lap. "Marcus genuinely believes he controls the board of directors at the firm. He operates under the delusion that the company is his sole property to leverage and destroy as he sees fit. But your grandfather was not a fool, Zuri. He knew his son was inherently weak. He knew Marcus lacked the discipline and the moral fortitude to sustain generational wealth." Estelle reached over and unlocked the top drawer of her antique side table with a small brass key. She pulled out a thick, leather-bound legal folder and slid it across the smooth glass surface toward me. "Open it," she instructed, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. I unclasped the leather strap and opened the folder. Inside, resting on top of a stack of notarized financial statements, was a certified copy of my grandfather's original will, alongside a corporate charter dated the exact week of my 18th birthday. I scanned the heavy legal jargon, my eyes widening as the reality of the meticulously drafted document began to set in. "Your father does not own Sterling Wealth Management outright," Estelle stated, her voice ringing with absolute, indisputable authority. "He is only the acting managing director. When you turned 18, your grandfather legally vested you as a 50% silent co-owner of the entire firm. Your signature is explicitly required to liquidate any corporate assets. Your physical approval is mandatory for any major board action or restructuring. Marcus has been operating illegally for over a decade. Every single dollar he squandered, every fraudulent loan he took out to cover his tracks was a direct theft from your personal equity." The room spun slightly as the sheer magnitude of her words hit me. I was not just a successful staging coordinator who had been randomly targeted for a quick bank scam. I was the literal co-owner of the family empire. My father had not just committed bank fraud with his wife's best friend. He had actively embezzled millions of dollars from his own daughter for years. He had looked me in the eye at dinner last night and threatened to cut me out of a will for a company I already owned half of. The physical space in the room seemed to shrink, pulling my visual focus entirely to the space immediately between us. Estelle reached into the pocket of her tailored cashmere cardigan. The air felt electric, completely charged with the weight of decades of hidden family secrets finally coming to light. She held out her hand, opening her palm to reveal a small, sleek silver USB drive. "I hired a private forensic accounting firm out of New York 6 months ago," Estelle said, her eyes narrowing into a dangerous, predatory squint. "Here are all of Brad's dirty money transfer receipts, along with every single illegal transaction your father has made since your grandfather died." She dropped the silver drive onto the glass table. It landed with a heavy metallic thud right on top of the corporate charter. "It is time to take out the trash, granddaughter." I slipped the silver USB drive into my pocket, the cold metal feeling like the ultimate weapon. My grandmother did not offer me a hug goodbye. She simply nodded, a silent contract forged between us. By the time I navigated Atlanta traffic and returned to my headquarters, the midday sun was casting sharp geometric shadows across the glass walls of my office. My assistant Maya buzzed my intercom before I even had time to review the files on the drive. "Zuri, your sister and her husband are in the lobby. I told them you were unavailable, but they are refusing to leave and threatening to call security on us." "Let them up, Maya," I said, a slow smile creeping across my face. "I will handle this." I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the warehouse floor. A few moments later, the heavy glass doors to my executive suite swung open. Chloe marched in first, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the polished concrete. Brad followed close behind, his hands shoved into the pockets of his tailored slacks, attempting to project an air of bored indifference. That indifference completely evaporated the second they took in the scale of my operation. Chloe stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes darted from the massive suspended glass conference room to the 50,000 square foot warehouse below, where dozens of employees were operating forklifts and loading custom Italian sectionals into branded freight trucks. She had spent her entire life believing I was a glorified maid who fluffed pillows for a living. The sheer magnitude of my multi-million-dollar empire hit her like a physical blow. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a knot of ugly, raw jealousy. "So this is where you hide while the rest of the family suffers?" Chloe sneered, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "Nice little setup you have here, Zuri. Who is actually funding it? Because there is no way you afford this overhead moving sofas around." I leaned against the edge of my glass desk, crossing my ankles. "I own the building outright, Chloe. The logistics fleet, the inventory, the payroll. It is all mine. What exactly do you want? I have international vendors waiting for my approval on a shipment from Milan, and you are wasting my oxygen. Brad stepped forward, placing a hand on Chloe's shoulder, assuming the role of the rational patriarch. He looked around my office, his eyes landing on the custom architectural blueprints spread across my drafting table. Let us cut the attitude, Zuri, Brad said, offering a patronizing, tight-lipped smile. We are not here to fight. We are here to talk business. Your little stunt last night with the credit cards was incredibly short-sighted. You embarrassed your parents and you put my company in a very precarious position. First Heritage Bank froze my accounts this morning pending a fraud review because you overreacted. I raised an eyebrow, feigning mild curiosity. You mean the $500,000 you stole from me to deposit into your offshore Cayman Islands account? That money. It was a bridge loan, Brad countered smoothly, not missing a beat. He was a sociopath completely detached from his own criminal behavior. A temporary reallocation of resources. Your father authorized it. But since you decided to be hysterical and freeze the capital, Chloe and I are offering you a compromise. Chloe stepped forward, regaining her false bravado. We need $250,000 wired to Brad's startup by the end of the day. You are going to write it off as a corporate sponsorship or a venture capital investment, whatever your accountant needs to call it. Family helps family, Zuri. You owe us for the stress you caused last night. I barely slept, my anxiety is through the roof. I let out a low, humorless laugh. You want me to sponsor a fake artificial intelligence company that fabricates its user metrics? You broke into my office to demand $250,000 after you got caught stealing double that amount. It is not a fake company, Brad snapped, his voice dropping into a harsh, condescending register. The mask was slipping. The polite tech entrepreneur was fading, revealing the arrogant, entitled bigot underneath. You would not understand the tech sector, Zuri. You decorate houses. I am building software that disrupts entire industries. I have actual vision. He took another step toward me, looking me up and down with utter disdain. Look around you. Why does a single solitary woman need all of this capital anyway? You have no husband, you have no children, you have zero legacy. You are hoarding wealth for absolutely no reason. Meanwhile, Chloe and I are building a dynasty. We are the future of this family. You should be funding my vision because it is the only way your name will ever be attached to anything that actually matters in the real world. The microaggressions rolled off his tongue with sickening ease. The implication that my wealth was wasted simply because I was a black woman, without a man to validate my existence. The sheer audacity to stand inside an empire I built with my own hands and tell me my legacy meant nothing. I did not raise my voice. I did not react to the insult. Instead, I slowly walked behind my heavy glass desk and sat down in my leather ergonomic chair. I placed my hands flat on the desktop. Beneath the thick glass hidden perfectly out of sight within the customized metal framing was a discreet physical recording device I had installed years ago for security purposes during high-stakes vendor negotiations. I casually traced my index finger along the metal rim. With a silent, imperceptible motion, I clicked the record button. A tiny, invisible red light blinked to life. A dynasty, Brad? I asked, keeping my tone inquisitive, almost admiring. That is a very big word. You consider your startup a dynasty. Because from what my financial team pulled, your software does not actually exist. Your back-end coding was outsourced to a cheap freelance firm in Eastern Europe, and your physical product is just a wireframe. You have zero active enterprise clients. How exactly are you building a legacy with a hollow shell? Brad puffed out his chest. His fragile ego simply could not resist the bait. He needed to prove he was the smartest person in the room. He needed to prove that my success was a fluke, and his failure was just part of a grander, brilliant strategy. You really think business is about the product? Brad scoffed, laughing as if I were a naive child. He leaned over my desk, planting his palms on the glass, bringing his face closer to mine. God, you are so incredibly small-minded, Zuri. The product does not matter. The pitch matters. The branding matters. Chloe nodded enthusiastically beside him, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband was confessing to systemic fraud. Brad is a genius, she chimed in. His investors love him. What investors? I challenged, staring directly into Brad's pale blue eyes. You mean my parents. You mean Marcus and Vivian. Brad let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It was a cruel, ugly sound. Your parents are exactly the kind of marks my business model relies on, he said, the racism and superiority dripping from every single syllable. Marcus and Vivian are desperate. They are wealthy black people who are absolutely obsessed with showing off. They are terrified of losing their proximity to white circles. They need a guy like me. They need the young, brilliant white tech founder's son-in-law to parade around at their country club dinners. I sat perfectly still, letting the silence draw more out of him. I do not need a working software product. Brad continued, his voice echoing loudly in the spacious office, perfectly captured by the microphone hidden just inches from his hands. I just need a slick presentation and the right buzzwords. Your father was practically begging me to take his money. He wanted to feel like he was part of the elite tech boom. He handed me the keys to his firm's liquidity because he wanted the prestige of my skin color and my supposed connections attached to his failing brand. It was the easiest money I have ever taken. Chloe suddenly shifted, a brief flash of unease crossing her features. Brad, maybe we should lower our voices. Why? Brad asked, standing up straight and running a hand through his hair. Who is going to hear? Zuri. She is not going to do anything. She knows exactly how pathetic her parents are. They serve themselves up on a silver platter. He looked back at me, a victorious, malicious grin plastered across his face. So yes, Zuri, my company is a shell. It is a vehicle designed to extract capital from people who are too insecure to realize they are being played. I took your father's money. I took your money and I transferred it offshore where none of you will ever see a dime of it again. And the best part is, Marcus cannot even report me to the authorities because doing so would expose his own embezzlement. Brad adjusted the cuffs of his expensive suit, looking incredibly pleased with his own genius. Now you are going to wire me the $250,000 to unfreeze my operating accounts, or I will let Marcus take the fall for the entire $500,000 bank fraud. It is your choice. Family loyalty or watching your parents go to federal prison while I walk away clean? He stood there radiating unearned confidence and absolute arrogance. He truly believed he had outmaneuvered everyone. He believed he was the untouchable mastermind pulling the strings of a family he viewed as nothing more than easily manipulated cash cows. He had absolutely no idea that underneath the smooth glass surface of my desk, the red light of my dictaphone was still blinking steadily, capturing every single word of his damning career-ending confession. I sat perfectly still, allowing him to finish his grand, unhinged monologue. Brad straightened his tie, gave me one last look of absolute pity, and turned toward the door. Chloe followed him, casting a smug, triumphant glance over her shoulder, as if they had just won a war I did not even know we were fighting. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind them, sealing the quiet back into my office. I waited exactly 60 seconds. I watched through the window as they crossed the warehouse floor and exited the building. Only then did I reach under my desk and press the small metal button to stop the recording. I plugged the discrete device into my computer and extracted the audio file. I played it back immediately just to be sure. Brad's voice filled my office again, crystal clear and dripping with racist entitlement, as he detailed the exact mechanics of his offshore wire fraud. I saved the audio file to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. Then I copied it onto the silver USB drive my grandmother Estelle had given me. The drive was now a digital bomb, holding both my father's decade-long embezzlement history and Brad's outright confession to federal crimes. I slipped the silver drive into my blazer pocket. A cold, profound calm washed over me. I was no longer a daughter seeking her parents' approval or a sister hoping for familial loyalty. I was an executioner mapping out the final blow. 3 days later, the mail arrived. My assistant Maya walked into my office holding a thick, oversized envelope made of heavy cream cardstock. It was sealed with gold wax pressed with the Sterling family crest. I broke the wax and pulled out the contents. The ornate gold foil lettering announced the upcoming Black Excellence Gala. It was the most prestigious charity event of the Atlanta social season, an annual gathering of wealthy philanthropists, politicians, and business moguls. And my mother, Vivian Sterling, was the reigning chairwoman. A small handwritten note card fell out of the envelope and fluttered onto my desk. It contained a VIP ticket and a table assignment. Table 42. Before I could even process the insult, my private line rang. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I took a slow, deliberate breath and picked up the receiver. Zuri, I am calling because I am the bigger person, Vivian announced without a single word of greeting. Her voice was syrupy and laced with that familiar, exhausting condescension. I know you are still throwing your little tantrum over the business loan, but family is family. The gala is this Saturday, and I expect you to be there. I expect to be there, I repeated, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. Yes, Vivian snapped, annoyed that I was not immediately groveling. The local press will be heavily covering the event, and I need everyone to see that the Sterling family is completely united. I will not have my charity night ruined by whispers that my own daughter is estranged. You have your ticket. You will wear something tasteful, and you will sit exactly where you are assigned. I looked down at the handwritten card. Table 42 is practically in the service hallway, Mom. It is located behind the kitchen access doors. It is where you belong right now, Zuri, my mother replied, her tone hardening into absolute ice. You froze our banking assets and embarrassed Evelyn. You have caused an incredible amount of stress for this family. You should be grateful I am even allowing you in the building. Besides, the front tables are reserved for the Foundation's executive board and our top-tier donors. We need the space because we have a very special announcement to make. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes narrowing. What kind of announcement? Your father and I are officially naming Brad as the new vice president of the Sterling Family Foundation. Vivian declared, her voice swelling with immense pride. He has shown incredible leadership navigating this recent financial hurdle. He managed to secure our audits and protect our capital. He is a visionary, Zuri, and it is time the entire city recognizes his brilliance. We are giving him full control over the Foundation's charitable endowment. He is going to give a keynote speech about the future of minority wealth management. It is going to be spectacular. The sheer audacity of it actually took my breath away. Brad had stolen $500,000 from me, funneled it to the Cayman Islands, and convinced my parents that he was a financial savior. Now they were rewarding his theft by handing him the keys to the Family Charity Foundation, granting him access to millions of dollars in untraceable donor funds. It was the ultimate grift. I will be there, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, dangerous whisper. I would not miss Brad's big moment for anything in the world. See that you do not, Vivian replied before hanging up the phone without another word. I placed the receiver back on the cradle. I did not throw anything. I did not cry. I picked up my phone and dialed David, my chief financial officer. I told him to cancel my afternoon meetings and to contact my lead litigator. Then I pulled the silver USB drive from my pocket. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a sterile, windowless conference room inside the federal building in downtown Atlanta. Across the metal table sat 2 special agents from the FBI's white-collar financial crimes division alongside a seasoned forensic accountant Estelle had retained months ago. David and my attorney sat flanking me silently, reviewing the printed dossiers we had prepared. I did not waste their time with family drama. I laid out the mechanics of the crime with absolute brutal precision. I slid a printed copy of the loan origination file across the table. 3 weeks ago, a commercial line of credit for $500,000 was drawn against my corporate staging company. Without my authorization, I explained, pointing to the forged signature line. The loan was manually approved by Evelyn Carter, a senior vice president at First Heritage Bank, who bypassed all digital underwriting protocols. One of the federal agents, a sharp-eyed woman named Agent Harris, reviewed the document. Bypassing biometric security on a commercial account of this size is a direct violation of federal banking regulations. Where did the funds go? I handed her the wire transfer receipts. The funds were instantly transferred to a blind LLC holding company. From there, they were wired to an offshore corporate account in the Cayman Islands registered to Bradley Hayes, my brother-in-law. Agent Harris raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with her partner. That is textbook money laundering and wire fraud, Miss Sterling. But proving intent and prosecuting offshore transfers can take months of subpoenas. Your brother-in-law could claim this was a legitimate business transaction authorized by your father's firm. I reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy leather-bound folder Estelle had given me. I opened it and presented the original notarized corporate charter for Sterling Wealth Management. My father, Marcus Sterling, does not own the firm, I stated, watching the agent's eyes widen as they read the legal vesting documents. I am the 50% majority equity owner. My father has zero legal authority to leverage the firm's assets to secure external loans or authorize third-party transfers. He has been operating illegally for over a decade. The forensic accounting files on this drive will prove he has embezzled millions from my equity to fund his personal lifestyle. I placed the silver USB drive in the center of the metal table. But that is not all, I added, a cold satisfaction settling deep in my chest. If you need proof of intent regarding the $500,000 offshore transfer, you will find an audio file labeled Exhibit A on that drive. It is a crystal-clear recording of Bradley Hayes standing in my office explicitly confessing to the entire fraud. He admits to faking his startup, creating the shell company, exploiting my parents' financial desperation, and stealing the funds with zero intention of returning them. Agent Harris picked up the silver drive, her professional demeanor shifting into sharp, predatory focus. You have him on tape confessing to the wire fraud. Every single word, I confirmed. He also brags about how easy it was to manipulate my parents because of their racial insecurities. It is a very enlightening recording. The forensic accountant plugged the drive into his secured laptop. We spent the next 2 hours going through the digital ledgers, the hidden bank accounts, and the forged signatures. When they finally played the audio recording of Brad's arrogant rant, the room fell completely silent. The sheer brazenness of his confession, the casual way he detailed his criminal conspiracy, left the federal agents shaking their heads in disbelief. We have more than enough for grand jury indictments, Agent Harris said, closing her notepad. We can freeze the offshore accounts immediately and issue arrest warrants for Bradley Hayes, Marcus Sterling, and Evelyn Carter for conspiracy, wire fraud, and embezzlement. I stood up, buttoning my blazer. Do not arrest them yet, I instructed. The agents looked up confused. Miss Sterling, they are a flight risk now that the money is offshore. Brad is not going anywhere, I replied. A cold smile touching my lips. He thinks he is untouchable. He thinks he has completely won. This Saturday night, my mother is hosting the Black Excellence Gala. Brad is being publicly named the vice president of the Sterling Family Foundation. He will be standing on a stage in front of 500 of Atlanta's wealthiest donors, preparing to gain access to their charity funds. I want you to execute the arrest warrants there. I want him in handcuffs in front of the entire city. Agent Harris studied my face, recognizing the absolute iron will behind my request. She slowly nodded. We will coordinate with local authorities for a public apprehension on Saturday night. I thanked the agents and left the federal building, walking out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The trap was fully armed and the FBI held the trigger. But as I got into my car, I realized there was one final loose end. Vivian cared about nothing more than her social status. The gala was her territory, her crowning achievement. If I was going to detonate this bomb and destroy her fake dynasty, I needed to control the blast zone. I picked up my phone and dialed my assistant, Maya. Maya, I need you to do some research right now, I said as I started the engine. Find out exactly who owns the Magnolia Regis Hotel, where the gala is being hosted this weekend. There was a brief pause on the line as Maya typed rapidly. It is owned by a private commercial real estate group out of Chicago, Missouri. They have been looking to liquidate some of their southern hospitality assets to cover corporate debts. Perfect, I said, merging onto the highway. Contact our acquisitions team. I want you to initiate a hostile cash buyout of the Magnolia Regis Hotel. Offer them 20% above market value for an expedited closing by Friday afternoon. Maya gasped. Zuri, that is an $80 million property. You want to buy the entire hotel? Yes, I replied, my voice perfectly calm and completely ruthless. Buy the entire hotel, but use our blind holding company. Do not let my name appear anywhere on the ownership paperwork until Saturday night. I am going to own the very ground they stand on when the FBI walks through the doors. Saturday afternoon arrived with a tense electric energy that settled deep into my bones. I was standing in my penthouse master suite, looking out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline as the final hours before the Black Excellence Gala ticked away. My phone began to vibrate violently against the marble surface of my vanity. The caller ID flashed my father's name. I stared at the screen, watching it buzz, knowing exactly why he was calling. I let it ring 3 times, letting his anxiety build before I finally slid the green icon to accept the call. Before I could even offer a greeting, Marcus Sterling's voice exploded through the speaker, a frantic mixture of breathless panic and absolute rage. "Zuri, what the hell did you do to my accounts?" My father shouted, his voice echoing loudly in my quiet bedroom. "I know this is your doing. Fix it right now." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the traffic below. I kept my voice perfectly level, injecting just a hint of mild confusion. "I have no idea what you are talking about, Dad. I am currently getting ready for Mom's big event tonight." "Do not play games with me, Zuri," he hissed. "I am standing in the VIP lounge at Tom Ford in Phipps Plaza. Your mother is in the fitting room having a complete nervous breakdown. She found a custom gown she wanted for tonight, and when I handed the associate my platinum card, it declined." Not just declined, Zuri. The terminal flashed a fraud alert lock. So I gave them my secondary card. Declined. I gave them the corporate black card. Declined. The store manager actually came out and told me that all my accounts have been frozen by the issuing bank. I smiled a slow, dangerous smile that he could not see. The FBI was incredibly efficient. Agent Harris had assured me the asset freeze would take effect before the weekend, but I had not expected the timing to be this delightfully inconvenient for them. The federal net was tightening, snapping shut around their stolen offshore funds and their domestic accounts simultaneously. "Dad, I have absolutely zero access to your personal financial accounts," I said, maintaining my facade of cool detachment. I froze my own corporate ledger to stop Brad from stealing any more of my money. "Whatever is happening with your personal credit lines is strictly between you and First Heritage Bank." "That is a lie," Marcus snapped, his voice cracking with the strain of public humiliation. "Evelyn handles all of my accounts and she is not returning my calls. You went into her office and threatened her. You used your ridiculous banking connections to flag my profile out of spite. The mayor's wife is in the shoe department right now, Zuri. Do you understand the level of embarrassment I am dealing with? I am Marcus Sterling. I do not get my cards declined like some common street hustler." The sheer delusion of his outrage was breathtaking. He was facing multiple federal felony charges for wire fraud and embezzlement, yet his primary concern was whether the mayor's wife heard a sales associate decline his credit card. His priorities were entirely dictated by vanity and ego. "I understand you are embarrassed, Dad," I said, letting a note of manufactured sympathy slip into my tone. "But I cannot unfreeze accounts I do not control. If Evelyn is not answering, it is probably just a weekend security glitch. Large transactions often get flagged on Saturdays." "I do not care about security glitches," he growled, desperation bleeding through his anger. "I need liquid cash right now. I have vendors to tip tonight. I have a major donation pledge I promised to make during Brad's keynote speech to kick off his new position at the foundation. If my cards are locked, I will be a laughingstock in front of the entire executive board." It was the perfect opening. He was handing me the exact leverage I needed to ensure he walked right into the center of the blast zone tonight without a single suspicion. "Look, Dad, I do not want Mom's big night to be ruined by a banking error," I said, keeping my voice soft and accommodating. "Family is family, right? That is what Mom told me on the phone. I know we have had our disagreements this week, but I am willing to help you out until the bank clears this up on Monday." The line went silent for a fraction of a second as his greed immediately overpowered his rage. "You are?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," I replied. "I can have my accountant cut a certified cashier's check from my private trust. $100,000. I will bring it with me to the gala tonight. You can use it to cover whatever pledges you need to make, and we can sort out the rest next week when your accounts are unfrozen. The psychological shift over the phone was instantaneous. The panic completely evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating layer of smug superiority. Marcus did not question why the daughter he had just defrauded was suddenly offering him a six-figure lifeline. He did not possess the self-awareness to realize he was walking into a trap. His narcissism simply processed my offer as a profound personal victory. He genuinely believed that his authority had finally broken my spirit and forced me back into submission. "I knew you would eventually come to your senses, Zuri," my father said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are finally acting like a true sterling. Your mother will be very pleased to hear that you are cooperating. This is exactly why Brad is stepping up tonight. He understands how to navigate high-level finance without getting overly emotional. Bring the check directly to our VIP table before the speeches begin. Do not be late." He hung up the phone without a single word of gratitude. I lowered the phone and let out a long, slow breath. They were so blinded by their own greed and their desperate need to maintain their social standing that they could not see the massive guillotine hovering right above their heads. They thought I was surrendering. They thought I was paying a toll to remain in their good graces. They had absolutely no idea that the check I was bringing them was nothing more than bait to keep them securely pinned to their seats when the federal agents breached the ballroom doors. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. My stylist, an incredibly talented woman named Elena, slipped into the suite holding a heavy garment bag. She unzipped it carefully, revealing the gown we had selected specifically for this evening. It was not a dress designed to blend into the background. It was a statement of absolute, undeniable power. I slipped into the gown, letting the heavy midnight blue silk cascade down my body. The tailoring was flawless, featuring sharp architectural lines that hugged my silhouette before flowing into a dramatic sweeping train. The deep sapphire color was regal, standing in stark contrast to the loud, flashy pastels Chloe always favored. It was a dress meant for someone who owned the room, not someone begging for a seat inside it. Elena stepped back, her hands clasped together in silent admiration. "It is perfect, Zuri," she whispered. "You look like royalty." There was only one detail missing. I walked over to my velvet chaise lounge, where a small antique wooden lockbox sat waiting. Rosa, my grandmother's housekeeper, had delivered it to my penthouse earlier that morning, with strict instructions from Estelle. I unlatched the brass clasp and opened the lid. Resting on a bed of dark satin was the legendary sterling diamond collection. It was a breathtaking collar necklace crafted from brilliant cut diamonds, paired with matching chandelier earrings. These were not pieces bought at a modern boutique. They were generational heirlooms acquired by my grandfather decades ago. Vivian had spent the last 20 years begging Estelle to let her wear them to high society events, but my grandmother had always refused, claiming the diamonds were reserved for the true heir of the Sterling legacy. Vivian had been furious for years, convinced that Estelle was just being spiteful. By wearing them tonight, I was sending a message that my mother would understand the second I walked into the ballroom. I was not just wearing expensive jewelry, I was publicly displaying the transfer of power. I was announcing to the entire city that the Sterling Empire belonged to me. I fastened the heavy diamond collar around my neck, the cool stones resting perfectly against my collarbone. I put the matching earrings in place and stepped back to look at my full reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The woman looking back at me was untouchable. The pain of my family's betrayal had been completely burned away, leaving only a sharp, glittering resolve. I picked up my phone and dialed my assistant, Maya. "Is everything confirmed?" I asked. Maya's voice came through crisp and professional. "The hostile acquisition of the Magnolia Regis Hotel was finalized 30 minutes ago, Zuri. The wire transfer cleared and the commercial deeds have been officially recorded under your blind holding company. You are now the sole owner of the property. The hotel management team has been notified of the ownership change, but per your strict instructions, your identity remains entirely anonymous to the public and the event staff until tonight." "And the federal agents?" I pressed. "Agent Harris confirmed her team is in position," Maya replied. They are wearing black tie attire and have already blended in with the event security staff. They are waiting for your signal. Thank you, Maya, I said. Take the rest of the weekend off. You have earned it. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my clutch alongside the silver USB drive and a crisp, certified check for $100,000 made out to Marcus Sterling. I grabbed my evening coat and walked toward the heavy oak doors of my penthouse suite, perfectly prepared to burn my family's fake dynasty straight to the ground. Let the show begin. The valet at the Magnolia Regis Hotel took the keys to my Porsche with a crisp nod. Flashbulbs from local society photographers illuminated the grand entrance, capturing the arrival of Atlanta's elite. I glided past the velvet ropes, the heavy midnight blue silk of my gown trailing perfectly behind me. If this were a film, the camera would execute a flawless tracking shot, following the sharp, confident click of my heels across the imported Italian marble of the grand foyer. I could feel the collective weight of 100 stares turning in my direction. The sterling diamond collar caught the ambient light of the crystal chandeliers, throwing brilliant, blinding prisms across the walls. I handed my evening coat to a bewildered attendant and stepped through the gilded double doors into the main ballroom. The space was a sea of custom tuxedos and expensive evening gowns. A jazz quartet played softly over the low hum of clinking champagne flutes and wealthy networking. Before I could even make it down the center aisle, a manicured hand clamped down hard on my forearm. My mother materialized out of the crowd. Vivian was wearing an aggressively sequined emerald gown, her face pulled into a tight, furious mask. Her eyes darted frantically from my face down to my collarbone. The color instantly drained from her cheeks as she recognized the legendary heirloom diamonds resting against my skin. "Where did you get those?" Vivian hissed, her perfectly manicured fingers digging into my arm. Estelle swore to me those were locked in a vault in Geneva. "Take them off right now, Zuri. You are making a mockery of this family." I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my arm. "Good evening to you too, Mom. I think they pair perfectly with the silk, do you not agree?" Vivian's chest heaved as she struggled to maintain her public composure. She glanced over her shoulder, plastering a fake smile onto her face for a passing city councilman before turning her venomous glare back to me. "I do not have time for your insolent games tonight, Zuri. Give me the cashier's check. Your father is pacing a hole in the green room waiting for it. Once you hand it over, you will walk straight to the back of the room. Table 42 is right next to the kitchen service doors. That is your designated spot. Sit down, keep your mouth shut, and let the adults handle the business of running this foundation." I offered her a serene, unbothered smile. I tapped the clasp of my clutch. "The check stays with me until Dad finishes his duties for the evening. And as for my seating arrangement, I think I will pass on the service hallway. I prefer a much better view of the stage." Before Vivian could utter another threat, I stepped around her and continued my march down the center aisle. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, measured authority of a woman who literally owned the marble floor beneath her feet. I passed tables of minor politicians, local celebrities, and mid-tier donors. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead until I reached the very front of the ballroom. Table number 1, the Sterling Foundation Executive VIP table. I pulled out the center chair, the one holding a gold-embossed place card with my father's name on it, and sat down. I barely had time to cross my legs before a shrill voice pierced the sophisticated hum of the room. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" Chloe stood on the opposite side of the table, wearing an atrocious pastel pink tulle gown that looked like an exploded cupcake. Brad stood right beside her, adjusting the lapels of his rented tuxedo. He looked equally furious, his pale eyes narrowing as he took in my presence at the head of the table. "Get up!" Zuri, Chloe demanded, keeping her voice to an aggressive whisper so the neighboring tables would not hear. "This table is strictly for the foundation executives and their spouses. You are just a staging coordinator. You have absolutely zero business sitting in the front row. Go find your assigned seat before I have event security escort you out of the ballroom." I did not move an inch. I simply leaned back in the plush chair, resting my elbows on the armrests. I glanced past Chloe's shoulder. Two men in immaculate black tuxedos with earpieces discreetly tucked behind their ears were standing near the stage exit. They were not event security. They were FBI agents, and they were watching my table intently, waiting for my signal. "I think I will stay right here, Chloe," I said, smoothing a wrinkle from my silk skirt. "The lighting is much better for the diamonds." Chloe's eyes dropped to my neck. Her jaw actually fell open as the realization hit her. The legendary sterling diamonds, the very necklace she had begged our grandmother to wear for her own wedding, was sitting casually around my neck, her face flushed an ugly mottled red. Brad stepped forward, placing a protective hand on his wife's back. He leaned over the table, invading my personal space with his signature brand of arrogant entitlement. "You really do not know your place, do you?" "Zuri," Brad muttered, his voice dripping with condescending venom. "You show up here draped in jewelry you did not earn, trying to play the part of a high society player. It is pathetic. Single black women with a little bit of new money always overcompensate. You decorate empty houses for a living. You are the hired help. Tonight is about real visionaries making real moves. Do yourself a favor and go hide in the back before you embarrass yourself in front of the people who actually run this city." I looked up at him, maintaining a calm that bordered on lethal. Brad thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought his microaggressions and his stolen wealth made him untouchable. He had no idea that the ground he was standing on belonged entirely to the woman he was currently insulting. A waiter approached, carrying a silver tray. I reached out and took a crystal flute of champagne. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the expensive vintage. "You are absolutely right, Brad," I replied, my voice smooth and musical. "Tonight is all about watching real players make real moves. I cannot wait to see how your keynote speech ends. I have a feeling it is going to be unforgettable." Brad sneered, opening his mouth to deliver another insult, but the grand crystal chandeliers above us suddenly dimmed. A hush fell over the massive ballroom as a single bright spotlight illuminated the main stage. The jazz quartet faded out. Marcus Sterling walked out from behind the heavy velvet curtains. My father looked immaculate in his tailored tuxedo, but under the harsh stage lights, I could see the sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium tightly. He looked out into the darkness of the crowd, his eyes frantically searching the front row until they landed on me. He saw me sitting in his chair at the VIP table, but he could not afford to cause a scene. He simply nodded, swallowing hard before leaning into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice echoing richly through the sound system, "thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the Black Excellence Gala. For 20 years, the Sterling Family Foundation has been dedicated to empowering our community and securing generational wealth for the future." The crowd erupted into polite, sophisticated applause. Marcus offered a practiced smile, waiting for the noise to die down before continuing. "But true wealth requires innovation," Marcus said, his voice rising with theatrical passion. "It requires vision. It requires stepping outside of our comfort zones and trusting the brilliant minds of the next generation. That is why tonight I am not just introducing a new vice president to the foundation. I am announcing a historic partnership." Chloe squeezed Brad's arm, vibrating with sheer excitement. Brad puffed out his chest, preparing for his grand ascension. "Bradley Hayes is a pioneer in the technology sector," Marcus declared, pointing toward our table. "He has brought an unparalleled level of sophistication and strategic growth to this family. And because we believe so deeply in his software enterprise, the Sterling Wealth Management firm is proud to announce that we are officially liquidating $2 million from the family foundational retirement accounts to serve as the lead seed investor in his brilliant startup." The applause that washed over the room was deafening. The sheer volume of 500 elite guests clapping for a monumental $2 million charitable investment filled the grand ballroom with an electric, buzzing energy. At my table, Chloe let out a high-pitched squeal of delight and threw her arms around Brad. She kissed him dramatically for the photographers who were currently swarming the front of the stage, their flashbulbs exploding like bursts of lightning. Brad pulled away from his wife and adjusted his tailored jacket. He smoothed his hair, flashed a brilliant practice smile, and began his triumphant walk toward the stage. He moved with the arrogant, untouchable swagger of a man who believed he had successfully outsmarted everyone in the room. He genuinely thought he had secured his fortune. He thought he had conquered my family. He thought I was sitting at his table completely defeated, having paid my $100,000 toll just to witness his coronation. I took another slow sip of my champagne, letting the cool liquid wash down my throat as I watched him take the stairs two at a time. Marcus stood at the wooden podium, beaming with a level of pride he had never once directed toward me. As Brad approached, my father reached behind the podium and pulled out a massive, oversized novelty check. The crisp white board was printed with the Sterling Family Foundation logo, and written across the center in bold black ink was the sum of $2 million. Marcus handed one side of the check to Brad, and the two men posed together for the wall of photographers. "Thank you, Marcus," Brad said, stepping up to the microphone, his voice echoing richly through the state-of-the-art sound system. His tone was perfectly modulated, dripping with false humility and practiced charm. "I am incredibly humbled to stand before you all tonight. The Sterling Family Foundation has always been a beacon of hope and progress for the Black community here in Atlanta. To be trusted with this massive endowment, to be welcomed into this family as a visionary partner, is the honor of a lifetime. My software company was built on the idea of empowerment. It was built to uplift, to innovate, and to ensure that minority wealth is protected and multiplied for generations to come." The crowd murmured in deep approval. Several wealthy donors at the adjacent tables nodded enthusiastically, entirely captivated by his slick corporate performance. "We are going to disrupt the financial sector," Brad continued, projecting his voice to the back of the room. "We are going to take the capital in this room and use it to build an unbreakable dynasty. I have prepared a short presentation to show you exactly how our artificial intelligence platform is going to change the world." He gestured expansively toward the massive digital projection screens suspended above the stage. The grand crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling automatically dimmed, casting the ballroom into an expectant theatrical darkness. The audience settled into their seats, turning their attention upward. I set my empty champagne flute down on the crisp white tablecloth. I slowly turned my head toward the elevated audio-visual booth located at the back of the ballroom. The lead sound technician, a man I had very generously compensated earlier that afternoon, was already looking in my direction. I gave him a single sharp nod. The digital projection screens above the stage flickered to life. But instead of a slick corporate video showing wireframes and data charts, the screen simply turned a solid, blinding white. A harsh burst of static hissed through the towering concert speakers, forcing several guests in the front rows to wince and cover their ears. Marcus tapped the microphone. "Apologies, ladies and gentlemen," he said, letting out a nervous chuckle. "Just a minor technical difficulty." It was not a technical difficulty. The static abruptly cut out. For a split second, the ballroom was completely silent. Then a voice boomed from the speakers, vibrating against the marble walls and rattling the crystal glasses on the tables. It was crystal clear, perfectly equalized, and undeniably belonged to Bradley Hayes. "You really think business is about the product?" The recorded voice scoffed, laughing with a cruel, mocking edge. "God, you are so incredibly small-minded, Zuri. The product does not matter. The pitch matters. The branding matters." A wave of confusion rippled through the dark ballroom. Guests began muttering to one another, exchanging bewildered glances. On the stage, Brad froze. His arrogant smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He stared up at the speakers, his face draining of all color until he looked completely ashen. Marcus furrowed his brow, stepping away from the podium. "What is this?" he demanded, looking frantically toward the back of the room. "Cut the audio. Turn it off." But the technician had already locked the soundboard. The recording continued, broadcasting Brad's damning confession at maximum volume. "Your parents are exactly the kind of marks my business model relies on." The recorded voice of Brad echoed across the 500 guests. "Marcus and Vivian are desperate. They are wealthy Black people who are absolutely obsessed with showing off. They are terrified of losing their proximity to white circles. They need a guy like me. They need the young, brilliant white tech founder's son-in-law to parade around at their country club dinners. The confusion in the ballroom instantly metastasized into shock. A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air out of the massive space. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The elite politicians, the charity donors, the business moguls, everyone sitting in the room suddenly realized they were listening to the inner workings of a massive systemic fraud. "No," Brad stammered, gripping the microphone stand, his knuckles turning white. "No, this is doctored. This is an artificial intelligence deepfake. Someone turn it off. I just need a slick presentation, and the right buzzwords." The recording pushed relentlessly forward, drowning out Brad's frantic protests. "Your father was practically begging me to take his money. He wanted to feel like he was part of the elite tech boom. He handed me the keys to his firm's liquidity because he wanted the prestige of my skin color and my supposed connections attached to his failing brand. It was the easiest money I have ever taken." The reaction was explosive. The absolute worst nightmare of the black elite is to be made a fool of by a white opportunist who smiles in their faces while mocking their success behind closed doors. The sheer blatant racism dripping from Brad's recorded words struck a fatal nerve. A prominent federal judge sitting at table 3 stood up and threw his napkin down in disgust. Several Foundation board members began shouting, pointing furiously at the stage. The polite high society veneer of the gala vanished completely, replaced by a rising tide of furious, visceral outrage. Vivian shot up from her seat at table 2. Her perfectly contoured face was twisted into a mask of pure horror. Her crown jewel, her prestigious charity event, the moment she had spent an entire year planning, was imploding on a biblical scale. The social standing she prized above her own children was currently being shredded in front of the entire city. "Cut the power!" Vivian shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with hysteria. Her emerald gown flashed under the stage lights as she waved her arms frantically toward the audio booth. "Security! Get up there and cut the main power lines! Shut it down right now!" But it was far too late. The final nail in the coffin drove itself home. "So yes, Zuri, my company is a shell." Brad's voice gloated loudly overhead, bouncing off the walls. "It is a vehicle designed to extract capital from people who are too insecure to realize they are being played. I took your father's money, I took your money, and I transferred it offshore, where none of you will ever see a dime of it again. And the best part is Marcus cannot even report me to the authorities because doing so would expose his own embezzlement." The entire ballroom descended into absolute chaos. People were shouting over each other, demanding answers. The local society press, who had been invited specifically to cover Vivian's grand triumph, immediately turned their cameras away from the stage and began filming the furious crowd, capturing the catastrophic downfall of the Sterling family in real time. Marcus dropped the oversized check. It clattered loudly against the wooden floorboards of the stage. He stumbled backward, his hands shaking violently as he stared at his son-in-law. He looked physically ill, his chest heaving as the reality of his exposure set in. His firm, his reputation, his illegal offshore transfers, everything had just been broadcast to the very people he relied on for business. I remained seated at the head of the VIP table. I picked up my champagne flute and took another slow, satisfied sip. I watched the destruction unfold with absolute emotional detachment. The fire I had started was burning exactly as I intended. Brad was hyperventilating. He looked out at the furious, screaming crowd, and then his eyes locked onto the main ballroom doors. He saw them. The two men in immaculate black tuxedos with earpieces tucked behind their ears were no longer standing still. The FBI agents were pushing through the angry crowd, moving directly toward the stage with undeniable, purposeful authority. 3 more agents materialized from the side exits, cutting off any possible escape route. Brad's survival instinct kicked in, overriding whatever tiny shred of loyalty he possessed. He realized he was trapped. He realized he was about to be dragged out of the Magnolia Regis Hotel in handcuffs, facing decades in federal prison for wire fraud. The slick, arrogant mastermind vanished, leaving only a cowardly, terrified rat looking for a way out. He ripped the microphone from the podium stand. The feedback whined loudly, piercing through the shouting crowd. "Wait!" Brad screamed into the microphone, his voice pitching up in sheer terror. "Wait, listen to me. It was not my idea." He whipped his head around his eyes, scanning the VIP tables until he found his wife. Chloe was standing frozen in her pastel pink gown, her hands covering her mouth in shock. Brad pointed a shaking finger directly at her. "It was Chloe," Brad yelled into the microphone, throwing his wife to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. "Chloe told me to do it. She planned the whole thing. She said her parents were easy marks. She told me to use her sister's personal information to secure the corporate loans. She told me to steal the money because the family's equity rightfully belonged to her anyway. She is the one who set up the offshore accounts. It was all her idea." The sheer force of Brad's betrayal hung in the air for a fraction of a second before the reality of his words fully registered. He had sold his wife out to save his own skin without a single breath of hesitation. Chloe stood frozen at the VIP table, her pastel pink gown suddenly looking like a tragic costume. The smug, triumphant expression she had worn all evening melted into a mask of pure, unfiltered shock. Her eyes wide and unblinking locked onto her husband, who was still cowering behind the podium, sweating under the harsh stage lights. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, save for the furious clicking of camera shutters as the local press captured every agonizing second of the Sterling family implosion. Then Chloe snapped. The shock shattered, replaced instantly by a primal shrieking rage. She let out a guttural scream that echoed through the cavernous space. She hiked up the voluminous layers of her tulle skirt and charged. She stormed away from the table, her designer heels stomping aggressively against the polished marble floor. She practically flew up the stage stairs, abandoning all pretense of high society etiquette. Brad saw her coming and took a terrified step backward, dropping the microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a loud screech of feedback. Chloe did not slow down. She lunged forward, raising her right hand and brought it across Brad's face with a sickening crack. The slap was so violent it whipped his head to the side. "You pathetic, cowardly bastard!" Chloe shrieked, her voice carrying perfectly over the open microphones scattered across the stage. "I gave you everything. I convinced my father to trust you. I gave you the lifestyle you could never afford on your own. And you throw me to the feds the second you get caught. You are nothing without the Sterling name." Brad reached out, grabbing her wrists to stop her from striking him again. He was frantic, his eyes darting toward the FBI agents who were now flanking the stage stairs. "Shut up, Chloe," he hissed through gritted teeth. "You are just making it worse. We need a lawyer." "Do not tell me to shut up," Chloe screamed, yanking her arms free. She lunged at him again, her manicured nails aiming straight for his eyes. But Brad violently shoved her backward to protect himself. Chloe staggered. Her stiletto heel caught the edge of the heavy, oversized novelty check Marcus had dropped moments earlier. Her ankles twisted beneath her. She let out a sharp cry as she lost her balance completely and went down hard. She hit the slick wooden stage floor with a heavy thud. The sound of tearing fabric echoed through the silent ballroom. The delicate pastel pink tulle of her custom designer gown caught on the sharp metal corner of the podium stand and ripped cleanly up the side seam, exposing her entire midsection to the room. A collective gasp swept through the 500 elite guests. It was not the torn dress that left the room paralyzed with shock. It was the object that had suddenly dislodged from beneath the heavy layers of silk and tulle. A smooth, flesh-colored silicone dome slipped out from the torn fabric. It rolled heavily across the polished stage floor, coming to a dead stop right at the edge of the orchestra pit, illuminated perfectly by the overhead spotlight. The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. I sat at the VIP table, completely still, resting my champagne flute against my lower lip. The missing pieces of the puzzle suddenly locked into place with blinding clarity. The rushed wedding, the sudden desperate demand for early access to the family trust funds, Brad's arrogant speech about building a legacy and a dynasty. Chloe had not just faked a business model with her husband. She had faked a pregnancy to secure her permanent position at the top of the Sterling Empire before I could uncover their financial crimes. The whispers began instantly. They started as low murmurs at the back tables and swelled into a chaotic, buzzing wave that swept across the entire ballroom. The mayor's wife covered her mouth in horror. Foundation board members shook their heads in utter disgust. The cameras flashed relentlessly, immortalizing the silicone prosthetic resting on the stage floor. Chloe scrambled frantically on her hands and knees, weeping hysterically. She lunged for the silicone pad, clutching it to her chest, and trying desperately to hide it under the torn shreds of her dress. She was not crying out of remorse or regret. She was crying because she had been entirely stripped of her fake prestige. Her entire identity, her superiority, her carefully crafted image as the perfect sterling daughter had been completely destroyed in front of the very people she considered her peers. Marcus remained frozen on the opposite side of the stage. He stared blankly at his daughter clutching the fake baby bump. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire universe collapse into dust. The grand dynasty he had embezzled millions to build was nothing more than a cheap, humiliating illusion. But Vivian did not freeze. Vivian Sterling had spent 40 years clawing her way to the top of Atlanta's elite social ladder. She had sacrificed her morals, her integrity, and her eldest daughter to maintain the illusion of absolute perfection. Now standing in the wreckage of her grandest night, she realized her social existence was dead. There would be no recovery from this. No amount of charity dinners or country club memberships could erase the stain of federal wire fraud and a fake pregnancy broadcast to the entire city. And in her narcissistic, deeply fractured mind, there was only one person responsible for the destruction of her empire. Vivian turned her head slowly, locking her furious, manic gaze directly onto me. Her emerald sequined gown shimmered aggressively under the lights as she began to march toward the VIP table. Her hands were clenched into tight, shaking fists. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged hatred. "You!" she screamed, her voice cracking with a raw, feral desperation. "You did this! You ruined everything!" I did not flinch. I remained perfectly seated in the center chair, crossing my legs and folding my hands neatly in my lap. I watched her approach with the cold, clinical detachment of a scientist observing an unpredictable subject. Vivian reached the table and slammed her hands flat against the crystal place settings, sending silverware clattering to the floor. She leaned over the centerpiece, her eyes wild and bloodshot. "You could not stand to see us happy," she spat, saliva flying from her lips. "You were so jealous of your sister. You were so bitter that you were left behind that you decided to destroy your own family. You are a monster, Zuri. You are a traitor." I looked up at her, the sterling diamond collar resting heavily against my collarbone. "I am not the one wearing a silicone stomach, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper. "I am not the one being indicted for federal wire fraud. I simply turned on the lights. You are the ones who chose to build a house out of garbage." Vivian let out a guttural scream of pure fury. She lunged across the table, throwing her entire body weight forward. Her hands shot out her manicured claws, aiming directly for my face, intent on dragging me out of the chair by my hair. I did not even have time to blink before a blur of motion intercepted her. Two massive hands clamped down on Vivian's wrists, stopping her assault mid-air. A tall, broad-shouldered man in an immaculate black tuxedo stepped smoothly between the table and my mother. He effortlessly shoved Vivian backward, forcing her to stumble and catch her balance on the neighboring chair. "Security!" Vivian shrieked, regaining her footing and pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "Where is the event security? I want this woman thrown out immediately. She is trespassing. Post it out from here. She is a traitor. Get her out of my sight." Three more men in identical black tuxedos materialized from the shadows of the ballroom, moving with swift, tactical precision. But they did not flank me. They did not reach for my arms. Instead, they moved in perfect synchronization, stepping in front of the VIP table and forming a solid, impenetrable human barricade between my family and me. Vivian stared at them, her chest heaving with exertion, her eyes wide with total confusion. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "I am the chairwoman of the Sterling Foundation. I am hosting this gala. I gave you a direct order to remove her from the premises." The tall, broad-shouldered man who had intercepted her attack adjusted the cuffs of his tuxedo jacket. He stood with a calm, authoritative posture, looking down at my mother with a mixture of professional courtesy and absolute indifference. He was the captain of the private security firm contracted by the commercial real estate group holding the property. "I am very sorry, Mrs. Sterling," the captain said, his voice carrying clearly over the frantic murmurs of the surrounding guests. "But you do not have the authority to issue security directives on this property." Vivian scoffed, taking an angry step forward. "I rented this entire ballroom for the weekend. I demand that you remove her right now." The captain did not move an inch. He crossed his arms over his chest, planting his feet firmly into the marble floor. "We only take operational directives from the legal owner of this establishment, ma'am," he replied, his tone perfectly even. Vivian frowned, her face twisting in utter bewilderment. "What are you talking about?" "The hotel management approved our security protocol weeks ago. The management team was relieved of their contractual authority at exactly 5 o'clock this afternoon," the captain stated, refusing to break eye contact with my mother. "The ownership of the Magnolia Regis Hotel changed hands in a private cash acquisition. The entire building, the grounds, and this ballroom now belong to a private holding company." The color completely drained from Vivian's face. She slowly turned her head, looking past the barricade of security guards to where I was sitting. She stared at the heavy diamond collar resting around my neck. She stared at the absolute unbothered calm radiating from my posture. The final devastating realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, causing her knees to visibly buckle. I stood up slowly, smoothing the heavy silk of my midnight blue gown. I stepped out from behind the table, walking right up to the line of security guards. I looked at my mother, watching the sheer panic consume the last remaining shreds of her ego. The captain turned slightly toward me, offering a crisp, respectful nod. "We are ready for your directive, Miss Sterling." I looked past my mother to the stage where Brad was currently being handcuffed by the federal agents, and Marcus was sitting on the wooden floorboards, clutching his chest in shock. I looked at Chloe, who was still weeping over her torn dress and her fake silicone pregnancy. Then I looked directly into Vivian's terrified, tear-filled eyes. "This charity event is officially canceled," I announced, my voice ringing with cold, absolute authority. "The FBI needs the stage to process their arrests, and I have zero tolerance for violence on my property. Captain, please escort my parents and my sister to the service exit by the kitchen doors. They are officially trespassing." The captain nodded, signaling to his team. "Understood, Miss Sterling." Vivian opened her mouth to scream, to protest, to beg, but the security guards were already moving forward, taking her firmly by the arms and dragging her away from the table. The reign of the Sterling family was permanently over, and I was the one holding the keys to the kingdom. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom had barely swung shut behind my screaming mother when a new voice shattered the momentary lull. "You cannot do this to me." Marcus had scrambled to his feet on the stage. His immaculate tuxedo was rumpled, his tie askew. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium, leaning forward with a wild, desperate look in his eyes. The room seemed to physically tilt around him, the grand illusion of his absolute authority collapsing into a disorienting, chaotic mess. "I am your father, Zuri!" Marcus roared, his voice cracking under the strain. "I am the head of the Sterling family. I control the foundation. I control the trust funds. You think buying a hotel gives you power over me? I will freeze every single asset you possess. I will tie you up in litigation until you are begging for a job fetching my coffee. You own nothing without my signature." I did not need to answer him. The response came from the very back of the ballroom. The main double doors flew open with a resounding crash that echoed off the marble pillars. The remaining guests turned as one, their collective breath catching in their throats. Grandmother Estelle stood in the entryway. She was 82 years old, but she stood as straight and formidable as a steel column. She wore a pristine silver pantsuit, her legendary posture radiating an untouchable, terrifying authority. Flanking her on either side were two more federal agents, their gold badges clearly visible on their belts. Marcus stopped mid-rant. The blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollowed-out ghost. He backed away from the podium, his hands trembling violently. Estelle did not rush. She walked down the center aisle with the slow, measured gait of an executioner. The sea of elite guests parted for her, instantly lowering their heads in absolute deference to the true matriarch of the Sterling Empire. She reached the front of the stage and held out her hand. One of the FBI agents stepped forward and handed her a wireless microphone. Estelle looked up at her son. Her gaze was devoid of any maternal warmth. It was filled only with lethal, finalized judgment. "Marcus, you no longer run the family company," Estelle declared, her voice echoing like thunder across the silent ballroom. "You do not control the foundation. You do not control the trust funds. I transferred complete and total operational control of the Sterling Enterprise to Zuri at 8 o'clock this morning." "Mom, please," Marcus choked out, dropping to his knees on the edge of the stage. "You do not understand. It was a business strategy." "Do not dare speak to me about business," Estelle snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "You and your greedy wife stole my money. You siphoned capital from my personal accounts to fund your pathetic social climbing, and then you forged your own daughter's signature to cover your tracks. You allowed that parasite Brad to infiltrate this family and loot our foundation. Your arrogance ends here, Marcus. Tonight." Estelle turned her head, giving a single sharp nod to the agent standing behind her. The FBI agents moved with swift, tactical precision. They marched up the stage stairs, bypassing the sobbing Chloe, and grabbed Brad by the arms, yanking him to his feet. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs snapping around Brad's wrists echoed loudly through the sound system. Two more agents stepped onto the stage and approached my father. Marcus Sterling, the man who had demanded my absolute obedience for 30 years, wept openly as they pulled his arms behind his back. Marcus Sterling and Bradley Hayes, the lead agent, announced, his voice carrying clear across the shocked crowd. "You are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud and felony elder financial abuse. You have the right to remain silent." The agent spun Marcus around, marching him toward the side exit alongside a weeping, hyperventilating Brad. The metallic click of the handcuffs seemed to finally shatter the remaining fragments of Vivian's delusion. The private security guards were actively herding her toward the kitchen service doors, but she dug her designer heels into the polished floor, twisting her body to face me one last time. The venomous rage that had distorted her features just moments ago evaporated, replaced instantly by a pathetic, clawing desperation. "Zuri, please," Vivian sobbed, her voice cracking as she watched her husband being hauled away like a common criminal. "You have to help us. Estelle just gave you control of a $65 million empire. You have the liquidity. You have to pay their bail. You cannot let your father sit in a federal holding cell. We are your family. Whatever our disagreements, blood is blood." I took a slow, deliberate step up onto the elevated edge of the stage floor, forcing my mother to crane her neck to look up at me. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, invisible, and unworthy. There was no sadness left in my heart. There was no lingering, childish desire for her approval. There was only the cold, sharp certainty of absolute justice. "You used to tell your high society friends that I was nothing more than a glorified house cleaner," I said, my voice projecting with a quiet, lethal calm that instantly silenced her frantic pleading. "You were absolutely right, Vivian. I am exceptional at cleaning up messes. And tonight I am permanently scrubbing the biggest pieces of trash out of my life." I reached into my silk evening clutch and pulled out the heavy keyring holding the keys to the Porsche she had proudly flaunted all evening. I held them suspended in the air for a fraction of a second, letting her eyes track the gleaming metal before dropping them. They hit the marble floor with a sharp, dismissive clatter. "Do not worry about the valet," I told her, my tone flat and entirely unbothered. "Tomorrow morning, I am donating that car to a local women's shelter to be auctioned off. And as for your immediate future, I strongly suggest you start packing. You have exactly 30 days to clear your designer belongings out of the Buckhead mansion. I purchased the defaulted bank debt on that property this morning, and your formal eviction notice will be taped to the front door by sunrise." 6 months later, the warm morning sun reflected off the pristine surface of the lake, casting brilliant golden light across the expansive stone balcony of my new waterfront estate. I leaned back into the plush cushions of my lounge chair, taking a slow, peaceful sip of Earl Grey tea. The suffocating weight that had pressed down on my chest for over 30 years was completely gone. In its place was a radiant, undeniable freedom. The fallout from the Magnolia Regis Gala had been swift and absolutely merciless. Marcus was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, his precious high society reputation reduced to a shameful cautionary tale. Brad faced an even harsher reality. Following his stint behind bars, his felony conviction triggered immediate deportation. He was shipped back to his hometown, stripped of every stolen dime, and permanently banned from the corporate elite. Vivian and Chloe experienced the most poetic justice of all. Completely blacklisted by Atlanta society and evicted from the Buckhead mansion, they were forced to move into a cheap, cramped rental apartment on the far outskirts of the city. The last update I received mentioned that Chloe was now working as a cashier at a local discount supermarket, spending her days ringing up groceries instead of parading around in stolen designer gowns. I never looked back. I permanently severed all ties with the toxic elements of my bloodline. Grandmother Estelle and I spent the ensuing months aggressively restructuring the Sterling Family Foundation, purging the corruption, and restoring its true charitable mission. Unburdened by my family's constant sabotage, my independent design firm exploded. We just secured our first major international contract to design luxury commercial spaces across Europe. Blood is never a license for someone to trample on your self-respect. If the people who are supposed to love you tell you that you do not have a seat at their table, do not waste your time crying. Walk out the door, work relentlessly, and buy the entire restaurant yourself. Have you ever had to face a toxic family dynamic? Tell me your story in the comments below. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. See you next time.